My previous guest actually named my plant, so you can't have that
Yeah,
pleasure,
wonderful.
unfortunately.
What's it called?
Oh God, it was Francis.
Such a good name, you could barely remember it. Yeah, I interviewed Rory Stewart. We did like a 2019 election review, and the studios like was black box, so it had between two ferns fields, and we brought a plastic plant and put it in between the two of us. And obviously, Johnson had just romped to an 80-seat majority, and I asked Stuart, "Oh, how are you doing this morning?" And he immediately started rinsing the plant and was like, "Oh, I feel a little bit like your plant, actually, plastic and decrepit." And I was like, "Oh, wonderful."
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beautiful Future. Yes, that is correct. 2 pieces of content within 6 months. What a world. Anyway, enough about me. It's far too boring. Joining me today is the fantastic head of news and politics at joe.co.uk, who, according to his Twitter bio, excels in both content and deliverance. Oli Dugmore, hello.
Hi, Hugh. Thanks for having me. Rethinking the Twitter bio now, it's just being quoted at me. I thought, oh my God, I heard it and was like, wait, he just said the word content, and I'm never going to hear that in like something that's vaguely cool enough to be able to quote unironically and it still apply. So I did, but yeah, if it's going to be fed back to me, maybe I should change it. Maybe I should just go.
Especially in like cringy YouTuber intro way. I don't think you could
Yeah.
ever hear anything worse.
I don't think it was too cringe. I enjoyed it. You know, it's 101, grab the attention, jump out of the screen. So no. You get, in fact, you're going to get your positive marks from me.
Thank you.
So
I'm excited to have my podcast performance review at the end of the episode.
Once you stop recording, it starts. Yeah.
That'll be the follow-up video. I make the video. We see how it does. About a week later, right? Here's what you could have done a bit better. All right, yeah, maybe cut the glasses. They're a bit wide. Anyway, Oli, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming on. Today we're going to be talking about all things you and all things Joe politics. So for those of us who are somehow not initiated in the wonderful world of your work, do you mind just giving a brief introduction about yourself and about Joe politics and how you got there and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I'm the political editor at joe.co.uk. We have a small team of young journalists who report on British politics. The way we do that is via social video, written stories on a website, the occasional media appearance like this one. But basically, Joe is a social media publisher with a sort of male skewed younger British audience, and so I tell those people about politics.
Joe Politics, of course, great source of funny PMQs clips, great original content. The Vox Pops. For example, the incredibly viral "The True Cost of U.S. Healthcare Shocks British Public." And I'm sort of interested in just generally, what is the general approach when going into a day to day of covering politics? Talk about there, it's mainly social focused. Talk about your audience, but what is your sort of I guess voice or like mindset going into making your content?
Okay, two parts to that question. The thing that I think about when I'm going into anything is the audience that I mentioned there. It's young Brits or young men, if you wanted to be more specific. But I should make it clear that I very rarely approach a story with like a men's rights perspective, if ever, really. But basically approaching something with the view of that I have, which is that traditional media really sort of underserves that audience. Newspaper purchases, particularly in that demographic, have gone off a cliff. The consumption of linear broadcast media, again, declining significantly for that demographic. Where are they? They're on social. And so there's a real opportunity there to tell those people about the world, about things that are important to them, about things that are going to impact their lives, that they deserve to know about and should be informed about, to go sort of broader media theory about it. An informed electorate is a good electorate. There's no such thing as well, maybe in the most extreme examples, but like there's no such thing as being too informed or knowing too much. That decision can't ever have a surplus of information, in my view. So that's kind of what the approach is, or what I'm trying to get out of it. In terms of the tone of voice and what I want things to sound like. Funny is important. Now, it might sound a bit weird in terms of politics, but having a sense of humor is really quite fundamental to our brand. Certainly in light of recent politics, I guess if you can't laugh, you'll cry. So try to make people laugh, but also because I just think I don't think journalism has to be dull. I don't think it has to be dour. I don't think it has to feel like a slog. I think to use the older forms, like good writing is such a joy to engage with, and you can come away from a well-written long read or a really thought out feature. Some of the best writers, like talk about recent generations, A.A. Gill, for example. Like I have read and do read his stuff endlessly, because regardless of the subject matter, the medium via which he's communicating, it's entertaining in and of itself. And I don't think that just because you're talking about landlordism, universal credit, immigration, that these things are by right that they have to be tough to engage with or listen with. I think you can inform people and entertain them simultaneously.
Yeah. So first of all, on the point of you have to laugh or you'll cry, I've been following politics for a while now. I've lost all emotion. I feel nothing. So no worries there.
Yeah. The other thing I should add to that is that by even though you produce stuff and you're like, oh, people will find that funny, but then you spend enough time in political media, you just become so deeply cynical that it's just kind of like, you're like, oh yeah, someone else will find that funny.
I've been here for 3 months. That's when I started the New Statesman. Already feeling it. Nothing but negativity coming out of here. I can tell you. This smile, hollow.
Cold. Yeah.
I mentioned a few of the more like the comedic aspects of the work that you guys do, but obviously there is a lot of very important, hard hitting, and very real journalism that you guys do. The piece on the English Channel, The Truth About Refugees in the English Channel, was a personal favorite of mine. Really unique and important work, as well as the piece on drug abuse and suicide in Scotland, of course. And I'm interested in sort of how it is that you go into your journalism, balancing between generally having like a more comedic voice, appealing to more I guess things like internet culture, whilst also engaging very seriously and very expertly with dark and sensitive subjects.
It's you can have both, right? So for example, that piece you mentioned about drug deaths and suicides in Scotland, that's probably not one to open with some kind of like meme mashup, head swap video or whatever. But actually, on that point, though, I would say one of the things that I found very moving about doing that piece actually was the Glaswegian sense of humor that imbued large parts of it. I interviewing the Fraser family about their son, their brother, Jack, who killed himself, and they were laughing about it. Not in a crass way, not in an insensitive manner. It was very much, they were taking the piss out of themselves. They were taking the piss out of him on occasion. It was very much a coping mechanism for them. So there was still, I guess, a seam of humor running through that, although by no means it was not the overriding emotion of the piece. But I would just say that I think there's a very, very long history in British media. There's a long tradition of satire for sure, and also that satire can sit alongside worthy journalism. So a cutting cartoon, as it would have been, could very easily, I personally don't find Mac cartoons particularly funny, but they are on the front page of the Telegraph, and accompany very serious, very significant and important journalism as well. The two can coexist in the same ecosystem. I guess it's just about knowing knowing not to bring a whoopee cushion to an interview like the one I just mentioned, or not that would ever be funny anyway. That was a poor analogy. You understand the point I'm trying to make.
Hey, don't you dare put down whoopee cushions, all right? They have carried my humor for years. And if you're telling me now that I've been making a mistake, I don't know how I'm going to handle it.
Okay, sorry, I retract that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, no, I think it's a really interesting analysis. I think there's a very commonality amongst people of having like dark humor during dark times, and it almost sounds to me it's more of like a acceptance of this is the way people approach things, sort of naturally letting humor weave into that. I was gonna say, do you think that sort of adds like an extra or like a sort of uniqueness to when the generally political and silly tone of Joe Politics, when it steps into things which are darker in the sense of having that willingness to say, okay, we can acknowledge whether it's the humor of that this family are delving into, or just around a subject. Do you think that gives it maybe more of like a relatable or realistic quality?
I think it makes it, yes, I do think it makes it more relatable. I also think it builds trust with your audience. There are few greater compliments a British person can pay someone than an absolutely devastating piss take of them. It's my friends who I confess my deepest insecurities, inadequacies, and concerns with, will also then weaponize them against me at a later date. And that's a mark of true friendship. I'm obviously being a bit glib, but I'm serious. The ability to not take oneself seriously and to be able to laugh, I think, is a really fundamental part of our national character. And I think it develops the relationship we've developed with our audience, I think, is enhanced by that sense of humor. As apparently Matt's salary at the Telegraph would also appear to indicate. Oh,
geez. We've talked about like the balancing of humor in the journalism that you and your team do at Joe Politics, and I'm sort of interested in I think generally there is an image of British media being quite traditional and quite like old fashioned. And I'm sure this is a question you get quite a bit, but I'm interested in sort of, do you think you've ever sort of experienced any like different treatment or judgment, even from from the Telegraphs of this world or from the Spectators of this world, just calling out my rivals, for being like more internet focused, being more young, and being more, I guess, willing to be more humorous in your coverage?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I wouldn't necessarily know. Because I'm not in the lobby. I don't go to the Red Lion, which for people who live normal lives outside of Westminster is a popular pub close to the Houses of Parliament. I don't really hang around with those people. So like on a personal level, I don't know what they think of us, which I kind of like, to be honest with you. I once went to a talk by Neville Thelbeck, he's the guy who, he was like a tabloid hack, and he did I think one his pantheon of scoops. I think one of them was like the Rebecca Lewis affair story of David Beckham, I think, which gives you a clue of the type of guy he is. But he was talking about the value of being outside of the pack and being like a lone wolf, and it being to your advantage. And I'm not suggesting that we're like sort of like on a singular mission to like destroy the political media in the UK, because we're not. But once I did the media show after the 2019 election with Amol Rajan and Piers Morgan, and Amol was asking about whether kind of the song mashups we do, where we get a politician to sing, like we got Michael Gove doing Because I Got High, or like a recent one was Boris Johnson doing The Killers, Nobody Told Me It Was a Party, or whatever, and it like he said, do you think you're sort of, these are really serious problems or issues, and you're cheapening them, or lightening the severity? And I no, resoundingly no. I would point back to the point I made earlier that there is a very, very long history of satire in this country. I think it's one of the fundamental parts of our media landscape. And all the way to like political wood etchings, and not having that, we would be the poorer for it. And yeah, if we didn't, well, actually no, you know what, fuck it, even if that was all we published, like I still think it would be, I still think it would serve a purpose. Of course it would. Like, yeah, okay, you're not sending FOI requests, and you're not doing a gotcha interview with whichever minister's on the broadcast round. But if you're producing a video that's being set, that like literally half of British WhatsApp has had sent down a group chat, I think that can have as big an impact, if not bigger, in terms of scrutinizing an elected official. I think it's hugely important still.
Yeah, it's something I'm very interested. I work in audiovisual, as we were talking about before, and I've always been very interested in sort of like the future of journalism and how that will like adapt alongside the growth of social media. I personally think that none of us will be able to write in 20 years, and interpretive dance and video will be the only communicative forms. I'm interested in how you see like the role of video journalism, whether it be podcasts as well, or of just the way that the internet and social media will adapt into the future, because we're obviously at a point now where virtually every single publication is very online, and they're clearly moving in that direction going forwards. How do you see that even going at the next step?
Well, Hugh, in the future, you and I will just be avatars in the metaverse, and that's how people will consume our content. I think obviously I think video journalism is really important. Maybe I say that because it's primarily what I do, but I do think there are certain stories that are visual, that are best told in that manner. Equally, I think there are stories that are best told in the written word. I don't necessarily buy the sort of declining. Well, I certainly don't buy the declining attention spans argument that is pretty popular in sort of parts of the media. Look at Substack, look at Glenn Greenwald, look at Andrew Sullivan, look at Matt Taibbi. They are all making, well, first of all, they're making an absolute shitload of money. The reason they're making that money is because people are reading them. So the medium is changing. There's no question about that. But I don't think it's necessarily the form itself. I think the written word is still hugely important. I think it always will be. I think, it'll still be present, but maybe in a sort of post-apocalyptic world where the sea levels have risen 2 meters, it might just be slightly harder for a future civilization to actually find everything that we've written, because it will all no longer exist.
And on that note, bye everyone, we're done.
I'm off to write a diary. Yeah.
Oh God. We've touched on a couple pieces that you guys have done in your journalism. We touched on the English Channel piece, and of course the Scotland drug issue as well. And I'm interested to dive into just these issues specifically. So for the English Channel piece, do you want to talk about how that started, how it came together, and how it was received? Just sort of the story of it overall.
It depends which part of the media you're consuming, I guess, but certain parts of the tabloid press, and actually quite a lot of the broadcast media as well, have been reporting for the last, more than a year, reporting on the small boats crossings of the English Channel. And the way that started out was like Sky News, BBC News going out in a boat and like shouting at Afghans in a dinghy, like, where are you from? And Nigel Farage, before he was at GB News, was doing a very good YouTube trade in going down to those beaches and pointing a camera at those people. So yeah, a lot of people were talking about it, and this was, I should make it clear, this was filmed before that boat capsized and those people died in the Channel. And I guess the way that certainly Farage dressing it up was that he had some kind of concern for the people in these boats, that they were endangering themselves. And don't get me wrong, it's obviously a deeply dangerous thing to do, to cross the busiest shipping line in the world in a inflatable that you could buy at Lidl. But I think you could, judging by his political record, I think it's pretty clear that there were other motives there for him talking about that rather than concern for those people. Not least because if Priti Patel and Nigel Farage are actually worried about those people, then they would campaign for letting them on the Eurostar. Just give them a ferry ticket, and then they can process their asylum claims here. That is an option that is available. The reason the people are making these crossings is because safe legal routes into the UK have been closed to them. So yeah, there's that's going on, and all of this is set around sort of the port of Dover, the historical meeting point, the formerly a land bridge until 20,000 years ago, a chalk ridge that linked England to France. It has been, for all of our recorded history, our meeting place with Europe. So because of that, there's the small boats crossing story there, but then it's also obviously a ginormous terminal point of contact for all of the trading goods that sort of crosses between the UK and Europe. And as a result of essentially Brexit-induced red tape and other things, freight was significantly slowed at the Port of Dover ferry terminal and sort of the surrounding area. So I went there and sort of said, look, a lot of the media is talking about this story in Dover, and they're not really talking about this one, i.e. the trucks. Do you think that perhaps the politics of either story, i.e. problem caused by Brexit and, well, without putting too fine a point on it, brown people coming to the UK, which is enough to alarm certain tabloid editors, why do you think they're talking about one and not the other? And that was kind of the provocative way into it. That then also, I don't want to. We spoke to shipping companies, the problems they had. They couldn't get drivers. A lot of these companies sort of had 10, 15, 20% of their freight fleet just parked on a forecourt because they couldn't get the drivers. The drivers used to be European. Brexit changes meant that they could no longer, if they didn't live in the UK, they couldn't work in the UK. They couldn't get the staffing. And so I think it was, this is going back a bit now, so forgive me if the details are wrong, but I think it was the Road Haulage Association estimated that there was a shortage of about 100,000 lorry drivers. Now, there's another part to that story, which is that I think a legitimate part of that story, which is basically the companies don't want to pay the drivers the wages that would encourage an Englishman, a Scotsman, a Welshman, an Irishman to go and drive a lorry, because it is not a pleasant existence. You're on the road for 14 days at a time, living in service stations and your cab. And so I guess that it then touches on a broader question of Brexit, which is like, why did we do this? And I guess some people would say we did it to reduce low skill immigration and transition our economy to a high skill, high wage economy. Well, if that's the case, you're going to struggle for lorry drivers. So
for a lot of people, especially a lot of people from outside the UK or people who just aren't really in tune with sort of situation, when you look at the treatment of migrants, modern UK's attitude to Europe and the rest of the world, and I think especially the migrant issue is a good one to focus on. And you've mentioned, for example, how a few tabloid leaders can get a bit uncomfortable about the concept of someone who doesn't look like them coming into their country. Do you see this issue and this broad treatment as like is it a specific politics thing? Is it, just certain parties, or is it really just a broader cultural issue that the UK happens to hold for whatever reason? Is it more top down, or do you think it's really just something that we deep down have to struggle with?
It's a broad question. Look, over the last, I don't want to minimize this as a topic, because over the last 20 years, particularly under Tony Blair and the introduction of new member states into the European Union and the open door immigration that resulted that followed, the UK has seen an unprecedented, literally in its history, number of new people entering the country. It's a huge social, cultural change to a nation. I think it's inevitable that not necessarily that friction follows, but there are obviously going to be consequences. Like, something of that magnitude happens in a country, things will change. Now, do I think it's necessarily follows that that those people are stigmatized or that they're shunned. No, I don't. I think and this is a quick aside, but I firmly believe that like a true form of patriotism, is believing and loving your country enough, and in the strength of its character, its culture, its ideals, that the introduction of other people from other places doesn't weaken those ideals, or doesn't weaken that character. That actually they're to its benefit. That they have something else to bring that can improve your country, and that's how I feel about it. Something I learned interviewing Slavoj Žižek. He spoke about it, and I found it very compelling. It's not all down to the media in the country, but I think a large some of it certainly is, which is basically, there's quite a popular cartoon which is like, it looks like a police interview room, and Rupert Murdoch's in the middle, and he's got a huge mound of cookies in front of him, and then there's a builder guy in like a high-vis jacket and a hard hat to his next with one cookie, and then there's like, a brown guy on the other side of the table, and Rupert Murdoch says, "Careful, mate, he wants your cookie." I think that it's a story as old as history, that the other groups of the other are stigmatized and scapegoated for political purposes, that the reasons for the structural deficiencies in our country, and that's another thing, by the way, about patriotism. I think true patriotism is criticizing because it's a belief and a desire to improve. It's the whole like, "I'll just shut up and love Britain, why are you complaining?" is like, it's just such phony nationalism. But basically the problems in your life have nothing to do with capitalism, with neoliberalism. The problems in your life are all because Mohammed's got on a dinghy and crossed the channel. And well, in actually in previous instances, obviously it wasn't that kind of case. It was more talking about sort of Eastern Europeans, Bulgarians, Romanians, the Polish. And before I became a journalist, I worked in a McDonald's in my hometown, and half of the staff were Polish. And they are some of, first of all, the hardest working, but also the nicest, caring, and funniest people I've ever met. You can end up hating Marek because you think he's taking your job, or if you spend time with those people, you realize quite quickly that they're just trying to make do in the same way that you are, and that you have much more in common with them. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but yeah, long and short of it, basically huge societal change in the UK. It doesn't necessarily follow that those people are scapegoated, but they have been, and as a result of that, it's now become politically advantageous to demonize them. Basically, is my view.
That's really interesting. I mean, like, it's always something I'm interested in talking about because, personally, I actually didn't grow up in the UK for most of my life. I grew up in America, Thailand, and China. If people at home have watched any of these, they've probably heard that about 100 times now. It's my favorite fact to talk about. So it's always weird because from the other perspective, you know what I mean? Just thinking about like I think you kind of nailed it on the head there, where it's like the kind of phony nationalism where people think that a couple people named, like you said, I don't know, like Marek or Mohammed turning up is somehow going to ruin their country. How pathetic do you think we are? I think we're great. Really interesting. And then, I guess, onto the other piece that we've talked about as well, drug abuse and suicide in Scotland. We introduced it earlier. You talked to a family who tragically lost someone to I think you said it was suicide. And I'm interested in, even just saying that is so difficult and quite gut-wrenching to even try and conceive of. How is it engaging with people who have gone through so much or in such horrible situations, like directly, and then having to, and then writing about it? What is like the emotional process of that? It seems so difficult.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the first one is kind of like self-loathing, because you're like, when we were with the Frasers, who, inspirational people. Honestly, they'd literally collected Jack's ashes on the day we went to film with them. So like he'd been dead a month, and it was just raw is the only way to describe it. And like his dad, Ricky, sort of said to me at the end of the interview, he's like, why the fuck would I want to talk to you? Like, the reason you're here is because my son's dead. Like, you know, we're all hurting. Equally, he then said to me about 30 seconds later, like, it was almost the thing he was most concerned about was like my own well-being. He was like, oh, it's, you know, kind of been easy for you being here. So that's like the initial part of it. Then weirdly, myself and Ed, our videographer, he's Glaswegian himself, we sort of left, and we were really struggling to recall what had actually been said, like, in the conversation. And our brains had basically, this sounds really callous, but it's not, like, they basically compartmentalized it and like shut it off. Like, it was unquestionably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Just like, if like outside like a journalistic perspective, from like a human perspective, so I don't have the emotional tools. I don't have, like, what can I say to that person? I can't to make them feel better. And yeah, like our brains had almost gone into like sort of self-care mode. And it was a blazing hot day. It was height of summer, gorgeous. And then we went to Ed's family home, and he'd just seen his family for, I think, the first day. It was COVID stuff, so I think he hadn't seen them for a while. And they were, you know, they were like really happy to see him. They cooked him a nice dinner, and then we were just sort of like sat there, just kind of like staring into space. So yeah, like, obviously, like, I think our brains had sort of gone into a bit of self-defense mode, and kind of, you know, tried to sort of blank it out a little bit. And then afterwards, emotionally, you're just trying to do justice to the people that have spoken to you. You're deeply worried about publishing something that they don't feel is, like, first of all, a true reflection of how they feel or what happened, and then also is kind of still, you know, broadly is true to the problem, true to what your analysis of it, and true to what you think the solutions are. So it then becomes sort of professionally taxing it in a way that it's not emotionally. I don't know. It's if I even talking about it now, it feels like I'm not. It's not cynical, but it's almost you feel like, to talk about something as horrendous as that, in even to talk about it in like a professional sense, it feels like, I don't know, like you're utilizing it, or like, I don't know, like, it feels weird. It feels almost dirty. I don't know. I was and am in awe of not just that family, everyone I spoke to in Scotland, for the suffering they've been through, their resilience in the face of it, and the bravery as well of speaking to me. Like, I won't forget the Frasers. I won't forget Peter Crichton, who was another character in that film. You know, he was a drug user. He got clean. He wanted to do something to help his fellow Scots. He started a safe injection site, basically got an old ambulance, kitted it out with sort of naloxone, which is basically like the Pulp Fiction drug. Like, if someone's having an overdose of heroin, you give them naloxone and they wake up. And but at the time there were questions about whether it was legal or not. Would the police let him do it? He lost his job. And he'd been clean for 11 years, and he relapsed because of the trauma of what he was experiencing. You know, he's watching people inject into open abscesses, people who'd lost limbs because they'd, you know, missed a vein, shot heroin into a muscle, and the result required amputation, in his ambulance still injecting. And that trauma, you know, he didn't have a support network. He's doing it himself. It's direct action. So it's not, he hasn't got, you know, any drug counselors in the NHS and elsewhere. They're provided counselling, they provided therapy. Well, he didn't have any of that, and he surrounded himself by heroin all day. So, you know, he's ended up taking again. But when I was interviewing him, he got clean again, and, you know, that his willingness and desire to help other people, quite literally, at, you know, jeopardizing his own health, his own personal relationships, and it's all to help other people. It's just utterly inspiring, and it's there's a lot to learn from people like that. And if one day I am able to exhibit the same degree of personal character and integrity as either of those people I've mentioned, I'll be proud of myself, because the things they've endured and the way they've responded to them are incredibly admirable.
Oh, geez, excuse me. Oh, even just hearing it secondhand. Oh God, that is it's incredible, really. I think it is, it's a real example of sort of getting out of the Westminster bubble of coverage. I think, you look at general media now, there is, and like even just, I've only just started the New Statesman, there is even like a real obsession of like, oh my God, it's PMQs this week. This is the biggest thing in my life ever. And I think, watching a story outside of what you would normally consider, it's not, your regular political coverage, and something that was obviously, so personal, was really important. And I'm interested in sort of, how much of a conscious effort you guys and your team try to really seek out and sought after stories which could be considered outside of, the regular media engagement.
Yeah, massively. I would just preface this by saying, like, it's not that I don't think Westminster is important.
Oh, yeah.
It is. The decisions that are made there are, they have consequences, and we spend a lot of time on PMQ.
Also, why I'm employed. I also do the PMQ stuff, so it's very important. Please keep me around. There's one for one of the New States.
No, look, absolutely, and I'm sure PMQs in a way keeps me in a job as well. But the point I was talking about, the consequences of the decisions, it's just we're covering the same story, and like in the same way that there is an important Westminster angle on things, because the decision that's made there will have long-term consequences. We just look at the consequences a little bit more, and like I have interviewed politicians, and that's important and serves a purpose. But actually, my favorite place to be is in Glasgow, and elsewhere in Dover. It's looking at what's happening, the real world follow on of a policy decision that's made. I interviewed Ian Hislop a couple months ago, and he was quite good on the obsession in media to look forward. What's going to happen next? Can I be the first person to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow? And don't get me wrong, like, serves a purpose and it's important, but actually there's a whole host of things, well, A, either going on right now, or B, what has happened, what was said, what were we promised, how were we told this was going to go, is it going that way, has it gone that way? And quite often the answer is no. So like there's enormous value in that, in reporting on that. And I don't think everything, again, like I'm not saying this because I'm getting down on like scoop based journalism, like, again, like, that's important. But I do think there's space for, there's no exclusive in going to Scotland and looking, like, everyone knows there's record drug deaths, everyone knows there's record alcohol deaths, like, but that doesn't mean that the story isn't as important as, I don't know, like if you get the Sue Gray report before anyone else. It's just about balance. And also, if I was to be like probably completely honest, there's a tinge of cynicism in that basically we have a small team. We have to be different from everyone else. We don't have the resource that the BBC has, Sky News has, Channel 4 has. And those are the people that I want to be competing with. So we have to do things differently. We have to pursue different stories. We have to approach them in a different way, and we have to package them and provide them to the audience in a different way. Because if we tried to beat them at their own game, with multi-million-pound sets and live broadcasting and gotcha interviews, we wouldn't be able to beat them, because we don't have millions of pounds of funding and 200 staff.
The idea of sort of, focusing on what's going to be next, telling you what's coming in the future, and then actually looking at, okay, what are the consequences of what's happening now, I think is really interesting. For example, we had a piece by Anoush pretty recently, Anoush Kellyan from the New Statesman, a really good one I thought was very good, was about the NHS and just the current crisis that they're facing, and things about like ambulance wait times and things like that. It just doesn't really seem to be something that is in the public consciousness that much. And I think the example of drug abuse in the UK, I think is a perfect one, because it is a real problem. There are loads of people who suffer with it and literally lose their lives because of it. However, when we look at our political media, or we look at, like, let's say, like political discourse, we look at Parliament, for example, the only time you ever really hear about drug abuse is in the context of, like, what was it Boris Johnson said recently, like, oh, we're going to stop middle class people doing cocaine. And it's like, okay, but what about all of the much more horrible stuff that's happening, and like people are really suffering with it? And all of the discourse is almost in a sort of like Nixon war on drugs kind of sense. Why do you think there is quite a general lack of focus on like the real, like, human consequences of now in our political discourse and lives?
I'd agree with you, by the way. I think Anoush does. I enjoy Anoush's journalism a lot, and I think she's actually done something on the New Statesman on like the woke Coke myth as well. So a double crossover there. I mean, I think it's basically. I think it's a cheap way to guarantee attention. Not cheap. And it's not easy either. I'm trying to think of the correct adjective. Basically, like if it's just like the fundamental, like 101 journalism, right? If you get a story first and put it on the front page, your newspaper will sell more copies than the one next to it on the newsstand. So, like, and I guess that's the invisible hand of the market, caressing us in various directions.
Ooh, caressing, you say?
Yeah,
a much more favorable way of putting it than I think some would.
Invisible caressing. But yeah, like, so there is that incentive. There's the eyeballs incentive, but equally, that's not to say like the other kind of journalism doesn't exist. It's the UK's magazine media is very good at it, and I include Private Eye in that, which also is fortnightly as well, so is always going to be a slower pace of thing. I basically think the two can coexist. They do coexist. It's just that the bright lights of the BBC 10 and the various other broadcaster social media clips, what's happening now and next is the focus of that. And I also think actually we kind of like that's slightly Brexity informed. I don't mean in any way to do with the EU. I mean like the literal like college green Laura Kunzberg's like doing a piece to camera, and like the Hugh Edwards is basically saying like, Laura, what the fuck is going on? Because no one else knows. And she'll essentially say like, well, this is what I thought it was 5 minutes ago, but by the time we finish, like, who knows? And as a result of that, I think that specific event and the media environment around it, I think, is informing what we do now, because yeah, like it was so febrile and intense that it indicative votes. Jesus, like all that stuff. It really was. It left the mark, and people weren't. It had such massive ramifications, and people didn't know. So I think that's informed it slightly. I also just think there's a broader trait in the human condition to be more interested in the future than the past, which is really to our detriment.
I think that's a perfect way to sum up journalism as a whole, really. Just what the fuck is happening? Please tell me. That's going in the thumbnail. Thank you very much. I need that. And right, last question, very quickly. It's a very quick one. What was that first pint back like?
Oh, delicious. Yeah, delicious. It was really good. I actually, I'm just going to say, during lockdown, a pub down our road was closing down because the landlord was their landlord was kicking them out so they could build luxury high-rise flats. And because they were being closed down, their tenancy was up. They just opened the pub in lockdown. So everyone was like stood outside the front of the pub drinking pints, and he was like, "We're staying open until the police come and shut us down." So that was like, I think that was December 2020.
Oh wow!
So I admittedly that wasn't like first pints, because we had pints before then. But yeah, I got a pint before. The first pint is always delicious. It's usually creamy, it's satisfying, and I guess I would just conclude by affirming my unwavering love of a cold pint.
Okay. First of all, classic goddamn clickbaity journalism, all right, you know. And secondly, you've now rivaled what the fuck is happening, please tell me, with creamy and smooth, which might also go in the thumbnail. So either way, we're having a great time. Oli, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great fun. I really appreciate it. Everyone follow at Oli Dugmore on Twitter. There will be a link in the description. Check out his work at Joe Politics. It is all amazing. Oli, thank you for coming on.
Cheers, Hugh. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for giving me the time of day. Cheers, man.
Thank you very much.